The first story begins with three lifelong friends, Mason, Lily, and Drew, who decide to escape the city for a weekend at Silverpine Lake, a remote camping site deep in the Pacific Northwest. The drive took nearly 6 hours, winding through towering evergreens that swallowed their SUV in shadow as the sun dipped lower behind the ridges. The air was crisp, clean, almost unnaturally still. They had heard rumors about the lake, how campers sometimes disappeared or left in the middle of the night, leaving their tents behind, but they laughed it off as local folklore. To them, it was just another adventure, a chance to drink, relax, and watch the stars. They set up camp beside the lake's edge, where the reflection of the pines shimmered across the water like black glass. Drew gathered firewood while Mason pitched the tents, and Lily wandered off to take photos for her blog. She loved documenting the eerie beauty of nature, the way fog hugged the treetops, how ripples spread across the lake like veins. As the evening fell, the three of them sat by the campfire roasting marshmallows, their laughter echoing into the vast emptiness. But in between the crackles of the fire, something else echoed back, faint, almost human-like cries coming from the opposite shore. Mason turned toward the sound, his face flickering orange in the firelight. "Probably a coyote," he said, forcing a grin. Yet Lily noticed his hands subtly tighten around the flashlight. Around midnight, the lake was swallowed in a dense fog that rolled in without warning. The world beyond a few feet of their campfire became invisible. The forest grew silent, no crickets, no owls, not even the soft rustle of wind. That's when they heard it again, a woman's scream, faint but unmistakable, cutting through the stillness. It came from across the lake, followed by splashing water, then silence. Drew stood up immediately, scanning the darkness with his flashlight. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Someone's out there." Mason tried to calm him down, saying maybe it was an animal or an echo, but Lily's gut twisted. Something about the sound felt too real, too desperate, like someone drowning. They argued for several minutes before Mason volunteered to check it out. He grabbed the small rowboat tied near the dock and said he'd paddle across just to be sure no one was hurt. Drew tried to stop him, but Mason was stubborn and brave in all the wrong ways. He rode off into the fog, his lantern glowing like a dying ember drifting into an ocean of white. Lily and Drew watched until the light vanished completely. Minutes turned into an hour, then 2. There were no sounds, no ripples, just silence and thick, suffocating mist. Drew muttered that they should go after him, but neither could see where to even start. When dawn finally broke, the fog began to lift, revealing the lake's still surface. The boat floated near the opposite bank, empty. Lily's breath caught when she noticed something in the shallow water near their camp, Mason's lantern, still flickering faintly beneath the surface, tangled in lake weed. Next to it, half buried in the mud, was a set of wet footprints that led up toward the forest, and then stopped abruptly, as if whoever made them had vanished mid-step. Lily and Drew called out his name until their throats went raw, but there was no response, no sign of struggle, no body. The only thing that remained was the faint echo of splashing water that came again that night, only this time, much closer to their tent. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, the lake's surface eerily smooth as if nothing had happened. Lily sat on a log, staring blankly at the ripples drifting across the water. Mason's absence weighed on her like an ache that wouldn't fade. Drew packed up some supplies, flashlights, protein bars, a knife, and said they'd search the woods before calling for help. His voice trembled with forced determination, but fear lingered behind every word. Neither of them wanted to admit it out loud, but deep down, they both knew Mason wasn't just lost. Something took him. They followed the trail of footprints where they had vanished the night before. The first few were sharp impressions in the mud, but after a few meters, they stopped abruptly on the forest floor, no broken branches, no disturbed leaves, nothing. It was as if Mason had dissolved into the fog. Then, about 20 feet further in, Drew noticed something glinting between the roots of an old cedar tree. He knelt and picked it up, Mason's camp knife, still wet, the handle streaked with lake slime. The strange part? There were no drag marks or blood, just that silent, perfect placement, as if someone had set it there on purpose. As they pressed deeper into the woods, the trees began to change. The bark grew darker, the air thicker, heavy with a smell of rot. Lily pointed out strange symbols carved into the trunks, rough circles intersected with jagged lines, almost like runes. Drew took photos, muttering that they looked too deliberate to be random. The further they went, the quieter the forest became, until the only sounds were their footsteps crunching the soil and their own shallow breaths. That's when Lily heard it, faint whispers, overlapping, impossible to trace. The voices were human but broken, as if carried through water. Drew stopped walking. The whispers seemed to circle them, echoing from all directions. Suddenly, the forest erupted in motion, a branch snapped behind them. Drew swung around with the flashlight, revealing nothing but trees and fog. Another crack came from the opposite side. "Who's there?" he shouted. Silence. Then, a soft splash echoed from behind them, toward the lake. When they turned back, Lily froze. Between the trees, maybe 50 feet away, she saw a figure, pale, half-submerged in shadow. It stood unnaturally still, its head tilted too far to one side. For a second, she thought it was Mason. She almost called his name, but something deep inside told her not to. The figure stepped back into the fog and was gone. Panicked, they ran until they broke through the trees and stumbled back to camp. The fire pit was cold, their gear scattered, as if someone, or something, had rifled through their belongings. Lily's phone was gone. Drew's backpack had been opened and left near the shoreline. Then they noticed something new, a second set of wet footprints, fresh, leading from the lake straight up to their tents. But this time, the prints weren't human. They were long, narrow, with claw-like impressions at the tips, each step sunk deep into the mud, as though whoever made them had just emerged from the water. The sound of splashing echoed again from the lake, followed by a faint whisper carried through the fog, "Come back." By the time afternoon rolled in, the mist had thinned enough to see the lake again, still and deceptive under the gray sky. Lily wanted to leave immediately, to drive until the trees disappeared in the rearview mirror, but when Drew tried to start the SUV, the engine only sputtered and died. He checked the hood, cursing under his breath, but everything looked fine. "Battery's dead," he muttered, though he knew it shouldn't have been. They hadn't used it since parking. Lily's phone was gone, his had no signal. The silence returned like a weight, thick and oppressive. The only sound came from the lake, slow, rhythmic ripples against the dock. Desperation pushed them to search for a ranger station or any sign of a trail out. Drew remembered a dirt path branching off near the entrance road, maybe half a mile north. They packed what they could and started walking, but the forest seemed to twist and stretch the deeper they went. The trail markers vanished, and every few minutes Lily swore she saw flashes of movement, a pale face between the trees, something watching, then gone. It felt like walking in circles. The landmarks kept repeating, the same bent pine, the same mossy rock, the same dead crow lying motionless on the path. An hour later, they found something unexpected, another campsite, abandoned. 3 tents stood half-collapsed, covered in leaves. A burned-out fire pit still held scraps of melted plastic and charred cans. Near one tent, Lily spotted a faded backpack with a name tag, Kara Jensen, Portland, Oregon. Inside were damp clothes, an old camera, and a torn page from a park map. On the back of the map, scribbled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't follow the voices. They sound like who you lost." Before they could process the warning, Drew heard it, Mason's voice. Faint, distant, calling his name from somewhere near the lake. "Drew. Lily. I'm here." It was desperate, panicked, exactly how Mason would sound if he were hurt. Lily froze, clutching Drew's arm. "That's not him," she whispered. Drew's expression wavered between hope and disbelief. He took a step toward the sound, but Lily yanked him back. "He's gone." "We both saw," the voice came again, louder this time, closer. "Please, help me." The forest fell silent afterward, every bird and insect holding its breath. Drew's eyes filled with tears. What if it is him? They stood locked in indecision until a new noise shattered the stillness, the crunch of footsteps circling them. Not running, not human. Heavy. Wet. Something dragging behind it. Drew shone his flashlight, and for a split second, the beam caught a figure between 2 trees. It was tall, its limbs too long, its skin pale and slick like it had been underwater for days. The eyes reflected the light, unblinking. The same second, it moved, impossibly fast, melting back into the mist. They ran without thinking, tearing through the underbrush, not caring which direction they went. Behind them, something followed, soft, rhythmic splashes echoing through the woods, keeping pace. When they finally stumbled back into their own camp, gasping for breath, everything had changed. Their tents were gone. The fire pit had been refilled with fresh ash, still warm, as if someone had recently been sitting there. But there were 3 camping chairs arranged neatly around the fire, not 2, the third one wet, dripping onto the dirt. Drew stepped closer, and on the seat of that chair lay Mason's wallet, perfectly dry. Inside was a photo of the 3 of them from years ago, folded in half, and across it, written in mud, "Stay tonight." As the evening bled into night, a low fog began to creep back from the lake, curling through the trees like fingers. Lily and Drew sat close to the fire, neither speaking. The forest was alive with tension, every rustle felt deliberate, every crack of wood like footsteps. The third chair still sat beside them, dripping faintly, the sound of water plinking against the dirt. Drew wanted to toss it into the lake, burn it, anything, but Lily stopped him. "Whatever's happening here," she whispered, "it doesn't want us to leave. Maybe we shouldn't provoke it." Her voice trembled, yet there was an odd certainty in it. Somewhere deep down, she felt that something in this place was aware of them. Watching. Waiting. When the fire burned low, the air turned icy. Drew threw more logs into the pit, but the flames seemed to resist, sputtering weakly as if smothered by unseen hands. Then came the whispering again, not from the woods this time, but from the lake. Dozens of voices, layered and warped, rising and falling in a dreadful harmony. Lily grabbed the flashlight and scanned the shore. Something shimmered just beneath the surface, pale shapes moving lazily, as if floating bodies were drifting below. "It's the reflection," Drew insisted, but his words cracked mid-sentence. The light revealed faces beneath the water, half decayed, eyes open, mouths frozen mid-scream. The ripples distorted them, making it look like they were mouthing silent words. Lily stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the log. Drew rushed to help her, but before either could speak, something rose from the lake. It wasn't Mason, it wasn't human. A tall, drenched figure stepped onto the shore, its clothes shredded, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Water streamed from its open mouth as it took a shuddering step forward. The air grew thick with the stench of algae and rot. Lily shone the flashlight directly on it and gasped. Its eyes were familiar. They were Mason's. His skin was pale, almost translucent, but those eyes, the same shade of green, stared at her with something that was not quite recognition. "Help me," he gurgled. The voice was broken, bubbling with water. Drew reached out instinctively, tears welling up. But Lily grabbed his wrist hard. "That's not him," she whispered, her voice shaking. Mason's figure took another step, and water dripped from his fingertips like ink. The firelight caught his hand. It wasn't flesh anymore, it looked like wet bark, splintering at the edges. His jaw twitched open too far, an unnatural gape. "You left me," he croaked. Behind him, the water stirred again. More shapes moved beneath the surface, dozens, maybe hundreds. Some small, some large. All human once. They ran for the car. Drew slammed on the ignition again and again, but the engine was still dead. In the headlight's weak flicker, the lake began to boil, bubbles rising, fog twisting violently. The sound of screams filled the air, overlapping, some high-pitched like children, others deep and guttural. The figures in the water were climbing out now, crawling on hands and knees across the muddy shore. Lily's shaking hands found the camera she'd packed earlier. She snapped a photo. The flash illuminated a wall of faces emerging from the fog, all open-mouthed, eyes hollow, reaching toward them. Drew shouted, "Run," and they bolted into the forest, the sound of splashing and dragging echoing close behind. By the time they stopped, gasping for air among the black trees, the fog had surrounded them completely. It wasn't ordinary fog anymore, it pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. The whispers returned, clearer this time, and among them, Lily heard her own voice whisper back to her. "You shouldn't have come back here." Drew turned his flashlight in a panic, but the beam revealed something else, a signpost, half-rotted, with faded letters barely legible through the grime. Silverpine Lake Campground, closed since 1989. Lily and Drew stumbled through the forest, their flashlights flickering weakly as fog pressed around them like a living wall. Every breath burned in their lungs, every sound behind them made their skin crawl. They stopped when the ground began to slope downward, revealing the faint outline of an old wooden cabin. Its windows were shattered, roof caved in, but it was the first structure they'd seen that wasn't swallowed by trees. Drew hesitated. "We shouldn't go in there," he said, but the cold wind behind them carried the faint sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, squelching through mud. Without another word, they sprinted to the door and slammed it shut behind them. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and burnt wood. Lily swept the flashlight around, broken chairs, a table covered in dirt, and an old newspaper nailed to the wall. The headline read, "Silverpine Tragedy, 12 Campers Drown in Freak Fog Storm." The article was from 1989, the same year the park closed. The story detailed a sudden storm that had swept across the lake, trapping campers in heavy fog. None survived, and their bodies were never recovered. Locals claimed the fog still returned every decade, along with the screams of those who'd died. Lily's hands trembled as she read the last line aloud. The rescue team reported hearing voices calling from beneath the water. Drew swallowed hard. "So that's what we heard last night." In the corner of the cabin was a desk half buried under old papers. Lily brushed away the dust and found a journal, its cover warped by moisture. The entries belonged to a man named Ranger Alden Price, dated just before the tragedy. The pages spoke of his growing fear of the lake, how animals stopped coming near it, how campers complained of hearing whispers at night. The final entry sent chills down Lily's spine. Something is wrong beneath the water. It takes their reflections first, then the rest follows. As she read, a chill crawled up her neck. The small mirror hanging on the opposite wall began to fog from the inside, though the air was still. When she wiped it with her sleeve, her reflection blinked, but she hadn't. Before she could scream, a wet thud sounded from the porch. Drew shone the light at the window and froze. A figure was standing outside, its face pressed against the glass. It was Mason again, but now his mouth moved soundlessly, and something writhed beneath his skin like trapped eels. The wood creaked as another shape joined him, and another. The drowned were gathering. Drew grabbed Lily's arm. "We need to go now." He kicked open the back door, and they bolted into the woods as the cabin began to shudder, the walls groaning like something massive was pushing against them from outside. They ran until the trees opened into a clearing. The moonlight illuminated what looked like the remains of a collapsed dock, and something half submerged in the mud near it, a rusted signpost reading, "Boat Rentals." Around it lay tattered camping gear, old lanterns, rotted sleeping bags, even cameras. Lily picked one up, brushed away the grime, and clicked the playback. The screen flickered, then showed footage of a group of smiling campers from decades ago waving at the camera near the same dock. But the final frame made her drop the device in horror. The fog thickened in the video, and behind the laughing group, dozens of pale hands began rising from the lake. The recording cut out with a faint, distorted scream, then the whispers came again, louder now, clearer than before. But this time, they didn't sound angry. They sounded pleading. The air trembled with the words, "Set us free." Lily turned toward the lake. The water shimmered faintly, glowing from beneath, as if the drowned were staring up from the depths, waiting for something, or someone, to break the curse. Drew looked at her with panic and resolve mixed in his eyes. "If this place wants us," he said quietly, "then maybe we end it, or it ends us." And together, they stepped toward the shore. The fog grew denser as Lily and Drew approached the water's edge. The moonlight was barely visible through the thick, rolling mist, turning everything around them into an endless gray blur. The air hummed, low, vibrating, almost alive. The voices whispered louder now, merging into a mournful chant that rose and fell like the tide. "Set us free," they repeated, but beneath the sorrow was something else, a sound that wasn't pleading anymore, but commanding. The lake rippled in slow, concentric waves as they stepped closer, the glow beneath the surface pulsing like a heartbeat. Lily knelt near the edge and reached out a trembling hand toward the water. The moment her fingertips touched the surface, the whispers stopped. Everything fell silent, the air, the trees, even the ripples froze. Then, from the center of the lake, a deep, echoing boom rumbled like distant thunder. The water erupted, sending a spray of icy mist across the shore. Drew grabbed her, pulling her back as something enormous stirred beneath the surface. For a moment, they saw it, a massive shape, black and slick, moving just beneath the reflection of the moon. And then the fog swallowed it again. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The water at their feet turned dark, thick, pulling downward as if the lake itself were breathing in. Lily screamed as she was dragged forward, her boots sinking into the mud. Drew clutched her arm, fighting against the invisible current, but the pull grew stronger, relentless. A burst of freezing air swept past them, carrying a sound that made their blood run cold, hundreds of voices screaming in unison, not from above, but from below. Drew yanked Lily free, and they fell backward into the wet grass just as the lake surface began to churn violently. Hands, dozens of them, reached up from the water, clawing, grasping, pulling themselves halfway out before sinking back into the depths, and then, the fog took form. It began twisting and shaping into figures, translucent, human silhouettes that hovered above the water, their faces blurred and mouths open in silent agony. At their center stood one clearer than the rest, a tall man in a ranger's uniform, eyes hollow, face half-skeletal. Lily recognized him immediately from the journal photo, Ranger Alden Price. His voice echoed through the fog, warped yet unmistakable. They wouldn't listen. The lake was hungry. "I tried to stop it," his hand lifted, pointing directly at them. "But now it needs you." The fog surged toward them like a living wave. Drew pushed Lily behind him, shouting, "Run." But there was nowhere to go. The trees had vanished into mist, the entire world reduced to gray water and whispering air. Lily fumbled for the camera she still had, realizing what she had to do. "They're trapped in here," she gasped. "They died with no one to see. Maybe it needs to be witnessed." She lifted the camera and began taking photo after photo, the flash slicing through the darkness like lightning. Each time the light flared, the faces became clearer, screaming, pleading, hundreds of them suspended in the fog. The last flash came with a deafening crack. The fog exploded outward, rushing back toward the lake as if inhaled by some invisible force. The water began to calm, the glow fading slowly until the surface was once again smooth and black. Lily fell to her knees, gasping, the camera trembling in her hands. Drew knelt beside her, clutching her shoulders. "It's over," he whispered, though neither of them truly believed it. The forest was silent again, too silent. And from far across the lake, just before the fog thinned completely, they saw Mason's silhouette standing on the opposite shore, perfectly still, watching them. Then he turned and walked back into the mist until he disappeared. Dawn broke over Silverpine Lake with a muted glow, the first sunlight they had seen in what felt like days. The fog had finally lifted, leaving the water still and eerily calm. Lily sat at the shore, the camera resting in her lap. Her eyes were hollow, her hands shaking as she flipped through the photos she'd taken. Every image was warped, streaks of gray, flashes of faces, distorted mouths frozen mid-scream. But one photo stopped her cold. It wasn't a ghostly blur. It was clear. The three of them, Mason, Drew, and herself, sitting around the campfire smiling. The strange part was, she didn't remember ever taking it. Drew stood a few feet away, staring out at the water. "We should go," he murmured. His voice was flat, exhausted. The forest seemed normal again, birds chirped, the wind whispered through the trees, but something about the air felt wrong, thinner, emptier. When Lily tried to start the SUV, the engine sputtered once, then roared to life as if nothing had ever been wrong. They both froze. After everything that had happened, the sudden normalcy felt almost mocking. They drove in silence down the dirt road, leaving the lake behind them, neither daring to look back, but the road didn't end. After 20 minutes, they passed a familiar sign, Silverpine Campground, 1 mile ahead. Drew slowed the car, eyes wide. "No," Lily whispered. "We've been driving away." He turned around, but the road behind them had changed, thick fog rolled in again, erasing the path. The trees seemed closer now, bending inward as if closing around them. They kept driving, faster this time, but every turn brought them back to the same clearing, the same lake. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the pale morning sky. "We never left," Drew said softly, realization dawning in his eyes. Lily clutched the camera and scrolled through the photos again. At the end, one new image had appeared, a reflection of the lake, with two figures standing at its edge. Her breath caught. The figures were them. The photo was time-stamped just a minute earlier. "It's showing us," she whispered. Drew reached for the camera, but the screen glitched, flickering. The reflection in the photo began to move, even though they weren't. The figures turned toward each other in the image and smiled, a slow, unnatural smile. Then, from outside, a faint splash echoed from the lake. They both turned toward the sound. The water rippled once, then again. A shape surfaced near the dock, a head, shoulders, and then a body. Mason. His skin was dry now, his face calm, but his eyes were empty, lifeless. He raised a hand slowly, pointing toward them. Drew stumbled backward. "No, you can't be." Mason opened his mouth, and a wave of whispers poured out, 1,000 voices overlapping. Lily felt her knees buckle as she realized what she was hearing, her own voice among them. The whispers weren't just from the dead. They were from everyone who had ever come here. The lake wasn't haunted by ghosts. It made them. The camera in Lily's hands clicked on its own and flashed once. For an instant, everything went white, the lake, the forest, the fog. When her vision cleared, she was standing alone by the water. The SUV was gone. Drew was gone. Only her reflection stared back at her from the lake surface. But as she leaned closer, her reflection smiled first. She screamed and stumbled back, but her voice didn't echo. It sounded muffled, like it came from underwater. The reflection reached up from the lake, its hand breaking through the surface, dripping and cold, grabbing her wrist. The camera fell from her grasp into the mud as the water swallowed her whole. Days later, a search party found the campsite. Everything was intact, the tents, the fire pit, the vehicle keys sitting on a log. The only thing missing was the people. On the ground near the shore lay a camera, half buried in mud. When the photos were developed, every frame was the same, a perfect reflection of the lake under fog. Except the last one, taken at dawn, showed three figures standing on the opposite shore, watching the photographer. One of them, smiling faintly, held a camera.